Well, good morning, Nikki. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. And I wonder if we could just start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your district where you work.
Awesome. I would love to, and thank you for having me. This is a really exciting opportunity to get to share. And once everything's out, get to hear what everybody else has to say. My name's Nikki Hannon, and I was born and raised in Browning, Montana. It's on the Blackfeet Reservation. And it'd be kind of cool if we could show you a map because we're in the northwestern part of Montana, middle of nowhere. It's awesome. I love it. Um, I graduated from the same district I'm working for, which is pretty exciting. I only left home long enough to get education. I went to Harvard and got a master's in education and risk and prevention, just so I could come home and try to do some good here. So it's all been working out good. With the district I'm in, for Montana, I think it's about mid-size. We have about 2,000 students, and 98% are Native American because we are on the reservation, and most of them are Blackfeet, but we do have other tribes represented. We have like 8 tribes in Montana now. Um, we serve, it's 100% free and reduced. And so when I speak of being on a reservation in, kind of a rural part of Montana, we do have a lot of poverty here, unemployment, and all the social ills that go along with those issues. But on the flip side, we have a beautiful area. We have lots of family connections. And so, all the positives are what drew me back home to work for this district that basically raised me.
That's great to hear, you coming back home and coming back to your district. Right now at this moment in history, of course, we're facing challenges that I know I never imagined. I don't know about other people, but so I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about some of the concerns and some of the challenges that you're facing as you look at this new back to school season.
Right. So, wow, with the pandemic, I think a lot of the things we struggled with on the reservation have just been amplified. Working in this field, working with students experiencing homelessness, the majority of the students we see are doubled up. And where we're at right now, um, Browning doesn't have a shelter right now. We don't have very many hotels that would be open. And so when we think about our students and their family connections, that's really why, I mean, we're not going to let people sleep outside in Montana cold. And so we have families doubled up. What COVID is presenting to us is the possibility of a big influx of people coming home. So as they lose jobs, as they lose housing in urban areas, some of the students who, were going to school in the universities, this fall we anticipate a lot of those families moving home. And because there's no housing here, we're looking at them being doubled up. And so before, like pre-COVID, looking at how do we serve, these families, there's 3-bedroom house, maybe 5 families to a house. The resources are just, we got to get really creative with how we provide these resources. So that's, I think, just in response to COVID and kind of anticipating that increase. That's one of my concerns. And another concern that's going to go along just with the new school year is our school is distance learning for the first quarter, and then we're going to kind of take it from there, whether we go blended or it completely depends on what this pandemic is doing to our community. And it's I kind of joke about Montana. We always see the fashion last, we see the all these things, we're always behind. And so I'm anticipating that same trend with this pandemic. It just hasn't hit us as hard as it possibly can yet. And I think our community is doing an awesome job being proactive, as far as like tribal sovereignty. We're shut down. They've shut down the east side to Glacier Park, and just really trying to protect us here and our elders. And yeah, so some of the things, the challenges facing other communities, I mean, they're here too. Specifically thinking about distance learning, with our students experiencing homelessness, knowing that there's going to be some pretty crowded houses, um, we're just the logistics of how do you serve students with
Mhm.
no internet connectivity, lots of people in the house. I know
Right.
this isn't unique to us, but it's something we're gearing up for. And one of my concerns as a liaison even is that we relied heavily on our paper registration packets to initially identify students,
Mhm.
experiencing homelessness, and we're not using those now. It's all over the phone. And so my concern is not being able to identify all these families fast enough. I mean, eventually we'll figure out who they are, but we want to kick off the school year, welcoming them back to school, into the community if they're moving home. And so identifying these students is a priority right now. So one of the strategies we've thought of is, just a public awareness campaign. Our particular program in our district isn't super vocal. People are self-referred or referred by staff, and we're really going to, focus our intention on getting out who we are and what we do to the community. And I didn't state before, but within Browning Public Schools, I'm the director for the Parent Community Outreach Program. And so within that is the McKinney-vento program, and we call it Espumotziop. And that's Blackfeet for we help each other. And
Mm.
so what we want to do is just get that out to the community through social media, the newspaper, because people do still read the newspaper, our local TV station, just any avenue we can, so that the partners we work with, the community members, they all know who we are, what we're all about. And we were just really under the radar prior to COVID. And part of that was just not being quite prepared to handle any kind of influx, but we're there now. Like, the program's grown. And
That's
so
great.
our outreach, we're going to amp up our outreach. And I kind of like, it's nostalgic to me. I like the idea of doing porch visits. It reminds me of, way back when people would sit in the rocking chairs and have their iced tea out on the porch. And so we're going to, move back to that for social distancing. And once we know who these students are, we can go to their, their porches and front yards, and bring some of these resources to them. So the other thing I really spent a lot of time thinking about, just with my own background, is dropout prevention. And so identifying, the students who we might have lost. We always lose students, go off radar in a, pre-pandemic, right? And so one thing I've thought a lot about is, when we all in March had to shut down everything, disengaging students, the ones who weren't very engaged to begin with are, they're
Right.
just out there now. And so what spring break turned into was summer break. And what I don't want to see is summer break turn into Thanksgiving break, winter break, and we just never re-engage these kids. So that's also one of my bigger concerns. And so I'm thinking, with this public awareness campaign, in doing all the outreach and these things, we're going to reach those students too, but we have to be really intentional about it. And
Yes.
sometimes it's as simple as running a report, figuring out who didn't come back in the spring and who hasn't registered this year, and just targeting, being really, really deliberate about welcoming those students back into a virtual world. And, once we get to that point, just maintaining that connection. Um, going where the kids are, they're on Facebook. We might not like the idea of using Facebook Messenger, but if that's the only way a student's going to respond to, hey, how are you? What do you need? Um, that's what we're going to do. So there
Yeah.
was one other
We've
thing
got
I
to
wanted
be creative and meet them where they are technologically. We have to.
to do. Yeah. And I know another liaison had pointed out the fact that, these crowded homes are really noisy, right? And kids aren't going to be able to mute each other. And so headphones is going to be pretty critical. And so anytime anybody says, what does your program need? I'm like, headphones. We're probably going to need a lot of
Good.
headphones. So trying to stay current on that kind of thing and what the kids' needs are. And And really the only way we're going to know what their needs are is identify them, talk to them, establish that relationship, and then they're going to tell us. And then we find the resource, right? None of that is anything new, that we haven't ever done before. It's just we're going to be more deliberate about it now with, with COVID keeping everybody at home. It's just that communication gap it's going to be huge if we don't make it a priority. There was one other thing I wanted to mention as far as like a worry or concern in our community. And I think this is actually kind of trending across the country, so it's not necessarily unique to the reservation, but we do see a lot of it here, is grandparents raising their grandkids. And, that's for lots of different reasons. And culturally, yes, we take care of each other, we help each other. But, with all the things going on in, society now, I mean, we do see a lot of grandparents raising their grandkids. And when I visited with them pre-COVID, asking them, what are some of your needs? They're like, we need a break. We need some respite. We have all these rambunctious kids. And so thinking about, they're all locked down and going to distance learn, and not only parenting for the second time, but being, their kids or their grandkids as teachers. I mean, that's a ton to ask of anybody, but grandparents who, realistically should just be able to kick back and enjoy their, grandchildren. This is really hard for them. And so we have a grandparent program within the Motel, and we're going to be really deliberate about reaching out to those grandparents, and, even if it's just somebody to talk to, and sharing with them, some resources and, even self-care tips, just whatever we can do to support our grandparents. Because I have 3 kids at home, and I get it. I can't imagine, not having like the energy or the physical ability, or, having the heart, but not all those other things to keep up with like a 2-year-old. So I know we can't say, here, drop them off, right? That's not an option anymore. Bring them to school, right? So trying to be really creative, just to meet their needs, just to lessen any kind of burden they're experiencing. So.
That's such an important comment about, everyone's mental health. We talk a lot about the students' mental health, of course, and the stresses they're under and the trauma, but then also thinking about whoever they're staying with, whether it's a parent, a relative, a grandparent, but then, adding on the physical stressors of an elder person and potentially financial stressors. And it can become a really, really difficult and even unsafe situation for all the generations.
And we do have generational trauma here, being like historical trauma, boarding schools. So some of the same grandparents who went through that boarding school experience don't trust the schools. They're raising the kids, and so for us to step in, it's a mind shift for them too. And it's just, I think of a ripple effect a lot. And how can we be a positive ripple effect? Because we're not going to undo any of that historical trauma, any of those experiences, but we can help people heal. If that's just calling once a week and just giving them somebody to vent to, or anything. Social isolation is the worst for anybody, and when you're suffering from generations of historical trauma and your own personal trauma, and then you're crowded in house. I mean, it layers, like all these things layer, and it can get really, really hard. And so one thing I've talked to the counselors about too is, if we're the only voice that calls that day, like, let's be a super friendly voice, like to the grandparents answering like anybody answering that phone, anybody getting on the virtual. It's like, you got to play, fake it till you make it if you have to, because we're experiencing the same thing, right? But it's really important when you call somewhere, you want to, have that really warm connection on the other end. So.
Yeah, this is so great. I really appreciate everything you shared. And I love the name of your program. Of course, I love the fact that it's in Blackfeet, but just what it's called, We Help Each Other. A lot of times we get questions, what should we name our program? Because obviously we don't want to call it the homeless program.
Right.
And you come up with all these different names, but that name is just so beautiful and so accurate and so warm and welcoming. And I just love it. What a great name.
Thank you. It's so crucial that we're actually talking to the students who are living these experiences and not making any kind of assumptions, From my cozy little office, like I have everything in here I need, and I can't fathom things that they actually need, like space and time to connect with people their own age. And they're figuring it out on their own too. If they have those, if they have the technology, they're figuring out how to connect. But they're in some ways mini versions of us. We have a staff meeting. You can't just jump right into the middle of business. I mean, you got to give people time and space to process. And I've and I don't know if this is necessarily a native thing, but we need a little extra time because we're storytellers too. So
Mm,
when you build in the introduction time, you're not just going to hear a name and a title. You're going to hear a story with that. And so we work our meetings and things around that. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to us that the kids they want to tell their stories too before they get right down to business. And it doesn't have to be some structured icebreaker either, because
right.
that doesn't feel very authentic. It's just give them the space, give them the time to express themselves. And so we just gotta, for that mental health piece, we got to keep that in mind too.
Yeah, that's fundamental. So important and so valuable. Again, helping each other. It's important for people to be able to say that. And it's also very valuable to us to listen.
All
Thank you,
right.
Nikki. This was just so wonderful. I'm really glad I got to talk to you.
I appreciate the opportunity. It's good. So.